The city of Venice was a realm of intrigue, where whispers of wealth and power floated like mist along the canals. In the late 16th century, among its many mysteries, there arose a man whose name would soon send ripples through the courts of Europe, Marco Bragadino. But before he was known as Bragadino, he had another name, one that he had long since abandoned. His origins were shrouded in uncertainty. Some said he was born in the aftermath of war, a child of displaced nobility. Others claimed he was a simple commoner who had mastered the art of deception. Yet when he arrived in Venice, dressed in fine robes and speaking in confident tones, he carried himself with the air of someone destined for greatness. Whispers of his abilities spread quickly. He spoke of ancient secrets, of forgotten knowledge passed down by alchemists of old. And most importantly, he claimed he could perform the greatest miracle of all, turning base metals into gold. Venetian nobles, ever eager for fortune and power, were drawn to him like moths to a flame. They listened as he spoke of the legendary philosopher's stone, the secret to endless wealth and eternal youth. His words were intoxicating, and soon they reached the ears of the Republic's elite. But behind the grand words and dazzling performances lay a deeper truth, one that even Bragadino himself might not have fully understood. He was not just an alchemist. He was a man walking a fine line between genius and fraud, between success and disaster. The game he was playing had high stakes, and as he prepared to demonstrate his miracle to the Venetian authorities, he knew one thing for certain: failure was not an option. The air was thick with anticipation. The city held its breath. Would Marco Bragadino deliver on his promise? Or was he simply weaving an illusion, one that could only last so long before it unraveled? His moment had arrived, and with it, his fate would be decided. The chamber was dimly lit, its walls lined with golden candelabras that flickered against the polished marble floors. A group of Venetian nobles gathered around a grand wooden table, their eyes fixed on the man standing before them. Marco Bragadino, draped in a robe of deep crimson, held a vial of shimmering liquid in one hand and a lump of dull metal in the other. "The time has come," he declared, his voice smooth as silk. "The ancient secret of the alchemists, once lost, shall be revealed again tonight." A hush fell over the room. The wealthiest and most powerful men of Venice had come to witness a miracle. They had heard the whispers, the rumors of gold spun from nothing, of limitless fortune conjured from mere dust. And now, here they were, standing at the threshold of that promise. Bragadino moved methodically, pouring the golden liquid over the metal. The flames of a small furnace roared to life, and he placed the lump inside, his hands moving with the practiced confidence of a master alchemist. Minutes passed, tension building with each second. Then, as he retrieved the metal and placed it on the table, the room gasped. The once dull piece of lead now glowed with a radiant golden sheen. The nobles surged forward, eyes wide, fingers grazing the surface of what seemed to be pure gold. Gasps turned to murmurs, murmurs to cheers. "Magnifico!" one of the lords exclaimed. "This is beyond belief." The air buzzed with excitement, the prospect of limitless wealth setting hearts aflame. But not everyone was convinced. A Venetian magistrate, silent until now, stepped forward and lifted the gleaming metal. He weighed it carefully, rubbing its surface between his fingers. Bragadino met his gaze without hesitation. He had played this game before. He knew exactly how long his illusions could last. "The process is not yet complete," he said smoothly. "Given the right conditions, this gold will be even purer, stronger. But for that, I require certain materials that only the Republic can provide." His voice carried an undeniable charm, and the room, filled with the dreams of endless riches, was more than willing to believe him. Gold fever had taken hold of Venice, and Marco Bragadino had secured his place at its very heart. But as he stepped away from the table, his mind was already racing. He knew the truth, they did not. This golden illusion could not last forever. The days that followed were a whirlwind of luxury and power for Marco Bragadino. No longer just an alchemist, he had become a figure of fascination, a man whose presence alone stirred excitement in the halls of Venetian nobility. He was granted access to the city's elite, dining in lavish palaces, discussing philosophy with scholars, and walking through the grand halls of the Doge's palace as if he belonged there. Venice, a city built on commerce and ambition, had long sought ways to expand its wealth. The prospect of limitless gold enchanted its rulers, and Bragadino, with his grand promises, became their beacon of hope. "Tell us, maestro," one noble asked, as they lounged in a private chamber overlooking the canals, goblets of fine wine in hand. "What do you need to continue your work?" Bragadino smiled. This was the question he had been waiting for. "There are rare elements," he said, his tone carefully measured. "Special compounds, known only to the highest order of alchemists. I will require funding to obtain them, but once I do—" He leaned forward, letting the silence build suspense. "Venice will no longer need to trade for gold. We will create it ourselves." The nobles exchanged glances, excitement flickering in their eyes. The idea of their city becoming the wealthiest in Europe, of Venice ruling the trade markets without rival, was too tempting to resist. The funds poured in, chests of coins, valuable artifacts, and secret deliveries of alchemical ingredients were all placed at Bragadino's disposal. But with every lavish promise he made, with every coin he accepted, the weight of expectation grew heavier. In secret, he worked tirelessly, not to perfect his craft, but to maintain the illusion. He was no true alchemist. The so-called gold he had produced had been treated with a thin layer of an alloy, a trick he had learned in Florence years ago. And though he had mastered the art of deception, he knew one undeniable truth. Time was not on his side. There were skeptics, men who whispered in dark corridors, questioning his legitimacy. The magistrate who had examined his gold at the first demonstration was among them. He had seen too many failed alchemists before, and though Bragadino's showmanship was unlike anything he had witnessed, doubt still lingered. "How long do you expect to fool them?" a voice cut through the shadows one evening. Bragadino turned, startled. A man, dressed in dark robes, stood at the corner of the candlelit chamber. The magistrate. "You play a dangerous game, Bragadino," the man continued, stepping closer. "The Republic does not take kindly to being deceived." Bragadino smiled, though his heart pounded in his chest. "Deception?" he said smoothly. "No, my friend. I am merely a man of vision. Gold takes time." The magistrate studied him for a long moment, then smirked. "I hope, for your sake, that you have enough of it." As the magistrate left, Bragadino let out a slow breath. The walls were closing in. He needed to act before it was too late. The bells of Venice tolled deep into the night, their echoes weaving through the labyrinthine canals. In the grand halls of the Doge's palace, Marco Bragadino sat at a banquet table, his golden goblet filled with the finest wine Venice could offer. Laughter and music filled the air, and for a moment it seemed as though his success was boundless. But behind the mirth, behind the smiles of the nobles and merchants, a storm was brewing. The magistrate's doubts had spread. Some of the Doge's advisors were beginning to question why, after months of funding, Bragadino had not yet produced any real gold. The chests of Venetian scudi he had received had disappeared into vague purchases of rare alchemical materials. The nobles had been patient. Wealth made men patient. But patience, like gold, was not infinite. As Bragadino took another sip of wine, A messenger arrived at his side, whispering something in his ear. The words sent a chill down his spine. The Doge had called for an audience, immediately. Bragadino placed his goblet down carefully, masking his unease. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. He was escorted through the towering corridors of the palace, each step echoing louder in his mind. He had played this game for years, but now the board was shifting against him. The Doge, an elderly but sharp-eyed ruler, sat in his gilded chair, flanked by advisors and the ever-watchful magistrate. The room was tense, the air heavy with suspicion. "Master Bragadino," the Doge said, his voice measured, "we have been patient, we have been generous, but the time has come for answers. Where is the gold?" Bragadino smiled, bowing slightly. "Your Grace, as I have said, the process is delicate. True alchemy requires time and precision. The final stage is near, but I must travel to Padua to retrieve an essential component. Once I have it, the transformation will be complete." The magistrate scoffed. "Another delay, another promise. We have heard enough. The Republic demands proof. Now." Bragadino held his breath. His mind raced. He could see it in their eyes. Doubt had turned into certainty. They no longer wanted explanations. They wanted results. And he had none. He exhaled slowly and nodded. "Very well. Grant me 3 days, and I shall deliver the proof you desire." The Doge leaned forward. "You have 2. Bragadino bowed and left the chamber, his mind already set. He would not be here in 2 days. That night, beneath the cover of darkness, he prepared his escape. A gondola awaited at a quiet dock. Its gondolier paid handsomely to keep silent. He gathered what wealth he had left, stuffing golden trinkets and jewels into a satchel. As he stepped into the boat, he cast one last glance at the glowing city behind him. Venice had given him everything: wealth, power, prestige, and now it would take it all back. The gondola drifted silently through the canals, away from the palaces and the promises he had made. By morning, Marco Bragadino would be gone, and the hunt for him would begin. The road to Padua was long, but Marco Bragadino had no intention of staying there. His escape from Venice had been swift, but he knew the Republic would not let him go so easily. They would send envoys, spies, and perhaps even assassins to recover their investment, or to silence him forever. Bragadino had only one option. He needed a new patron, someone powerful, someone desperate, someone who, like the Venetians, was willing to believe in the dream of limitless gold. And so he set his sights on Bavaria. By late summer of 1590, Bragadino arrived at the court of William V, Duke of Bavaria, in the towering Trausnitz castle of Landshut. The Duke was a deeply religious man, tormented by political debts and personal ailments, particularly a relentless pain in his head that no physician had been able to cure. Bragadino wasted no time. "I have seen the divine secrets of alchemy," he proclaimed before the court. "With your trust, my lord, I shall not only ease your suffering, but grant you a treasure beyond imagination." The promise of relief, both physical and financial, was too great for the Duke to ignore. Bragadino was given chambers within the castle, where he once again set up his elaborate show of alchemy. But this time, the stakes were even higher. William V was no Venetian noble, easily seduced by smooth words and dazzling illusions. He was a ruler with a court full of scholars, theologians, and military men, men who had seen charlatans before. Bragadino knew that if he failed here, he would not simply be exiled or humiliated, he would die. And so he played the game more carefully than ever. He demonstrated small miracles to the Duke, offering powders that shimmered in candlelight, tinctures that appeared to change color in his hands. He performed elaborate rituals, drawing cryptic symbols on parchment and speaking in hushed tones of ancient knowledge passed down by forgotten masters. For months he stalled, convincing the Duke that the grand transmutation was just beyond reach. But the court was watching, and the Duke's patience, unlike the Venetians, was limited. Then, one fateful evening, William V sent for him with an ultimatum. "You have promised much," the Duke said, his eyes dark with suspicion. "And yet, gold remains in the realm of words, not reality. Tell me, Bragadino, why should I not call my executioner this very night?" Bragadino swallowed hard. He had run out of excuses, but he had not run out of tricks. "My lord," he said carefully, "the process is nearly complete. But I must go to Munich to retrieve a final ingredient from a sacred source." The Duke studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Very well. You shall go to Munich." Bragadino exhaled, relieved, but he had misunderstood the meaning of the Duke's words. William V did not intend to let him run. Guards surrounded him as the Duke continued. "But know this," the Duke said, "if you do not return with proof, you shall never leave Munich alive." Bragadino felt the weight of the walls closing in. The golden illusion was beginning to crack, and this time there was no escape. Munich was colder than Bragadino had expected, both in weather and in welcome. The grand halls of Bavaria, once a place where he had spun golden dreams, now felt like a prison. The Duke's patience had reached its end. No more promises, no more delays. The time for deception had run out. Under armed guard, he was led into a chamber within the city, where a final test had been arranged. In the center of the room stood a crucible, surrounded by men of science, advisors to the Duke, and executioners who had already sharpened their blades. "You will make gold here and now," one of the advisors said coldly, "or you will not leave this room alive." Bragadino's hands trembled. He had performed this act so many times before. Sleight of hand, a distraction, a clever chemical trick to fool the eyes. But now, with trained scholars watching every move, there was no room for illusions. He reached for the materials on the table, his mind racing. Could he fake it one last time? Could he escape with his life? The fire roared in the furnace. The crucible glowed red-hot. The moment had come. He dropped the metal into the flames, uttering incantations, playing the role he had perfected over the years. But there was nothing left to save him. Minutes passed. Then an advisor stepped forward, lifting the metal with tongs. He studied it, then let it fall to the stone floor with a heavy clang. Nothing. Bragadino had failed. The room remained silent for a moment. Then the Duke spoke. "You are a fraud," he said, his voice thick with fury. "A liar. A thief." Guards seized Bragadino by the arms. He struggled, but there was no use. His charm, his wit, his golden tongue, all the tools that had built his empire of deception were now powerless against the cold hands of fate. The execution was scheduled for the next morning. The city of Munich awoke to a different kind of spectacle than the ones Bragadino had once performed. The square was filled with onlookers, eager to witness the fate of the so-called Alchemist. His sentence was clear. It was finally done. The man who had promised gold had met an end cold as iron. His name would live on, not as a master of alchemy, but as a warning, a lesson of how far ambition and deception could take a man, and how quickly they could destroy him.